last year in January of 2024, the Office of Special Education Programs had released some guidance. So that's what you see on the screen here. It's called Myths and Facts Surrounding Assistive Technology Devices and Services. And when this was released, I really liked it because it's intended for everybody. This is not a guidance document that is made for politicians or specifically for educators or administrators. This document was really made for everybody, a really wide range of individuals to understand, even if you're not an assistive technology pro. So if you're a parent whose student maybe uses assistive technology and it's new to you, hopefully you learn a couple of things. Maybe you are an AT pro and this could be useful for you to kind of have some talking points as you talk to people about assistive technology. But we want to go over this today and share some of these myths and facts. So that guidance document is broken up into these categories you see on the screen. Part B, that's our school age program. Part C, that's our early childhood program. So it kind of talks about assistive technology in the school and then, in early childhood beforehand, deploying assistive technology services, deploying devices to students. And then what about the costs and the funding? So we're going to see some myths and facts surrounding all of those different categories. And then once we talk about those common misconceptions around AT, the next thing that we want to do at the end of the day, I always like to share resources. So there is CITES is one of our federal partners. It's called the Center on Inclusive Technology and Educational Systems. And they have a lot of different resources on their website to continue talking about AT and using these myths and facts to kind of continue to learn. So we want to share some of those resources with you at the end of the day. So Carrie, I'm going to let you start with talking about Part B, or supporting school-age children with disabilities. And just to kind of help you guys interact with some of these, I'd love to get some feedback for you. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little react button. It's like the smiley face emoji. And if you have heard one of these myths and facts before, or maybe it's something that you're not quite sure, there's a little emoji guy kind of thinking there with his hand on his chin. So you can go ahead and hit that button if that is maybe a myth that you have heard before. So Carrie, I'll let you go ahead and take it away. Let me know when you want me to flip the slides.
Works better when you turn your microphone on. Well, as Maggie said, my name is Carrie Bridges. I am the program manager for Atlas project at East Shields Crossroads. We are partnered with the IDOE to provide that assistive technology lending library to the LEAs in Indiana. And then we also can provide technical support from our specialist in the area of equipment or device demonstrations, providing a couple different devices. If you kind of know what you want, but not specifically, we can bring those out, demonstrate them for you, help you choose what might be a good device to borrow. And then we also can provide workshops and professional development in the areas of assistive technology. So we are excited to work with educators and schools to help them become more supportive of students and then also more educated. So we are going to start with idea part B, so supporting school-age children. So our first slide here is the myth is that AT should be considered at some of the IEP meetings. And while that sounds great, it should be considered at every IEP meeting. So every time the case conference meets to either develop, review, revise an IEP, the case conference committee should be considering whether or not that child requires an AT device or service. And when that IEP determines that AT devices or services are required to enable the child to have FAPE, the LEA is responsible for providing and maintaining the AD device, and then also providing any necessary related AT service. So the IEP team can determine the AT device and services that are needed, but specifically the IEP statement regarding special education related services should include the ability for the to advance appropriately towards obtaining the annual goals of their IEP, to be involved in and make progress in the general education curriculum, participate in extracurricular activities and other non-academic activities, and to be educated and participate with other children with disabilities as well as non-disabled students. So our next myth is going to be that providing AT devices and services is optional, which is not correct. So IEP teams must consider AT devices and services for all children with IEPs, regardless of their disability or eligibility. And they must provide and fully fund the AT devices and services if the case conference committee determines they are necessary in order for the child to have FAPE. So IDEA and its regulators are the case conference committee determines it's necessary. The IEP team members need to make sure they have knowledge about that, and if not, they can engage in other professionals about what options might be the best. And then, you know, myself, the Atlas program, Maggie are great resources if you need that additional support about what AT device or service might be best for a student. Myth number 3 says providing a device only meets the IDEA requirement, which is not accurate. So IDEA requires that devices and supporting services are provided to that child. So it is critical that when you are providing, sorry, I was reading the chat, providing that AT services also have to be considered because they directly assist a child in this disability with the selection, the acquisition, and the use of the device. We want to make sure that parents, families, teachers, related service providers have that training on how to implement the device to ensure that like everybody's using that correctly, that the AT device is being used consistently in the home, but as well as school. So an example would be if an IEP team determines that a child needs a pencil grip as an AT device, to improve the child's grasp of a pencil, this related service could include testing out multiple pencil grips, selecting the appropriate pencil grip, training the child's parents and teachers on the correct way to use the pencil grip, and then eventually developing strategies to support that child in using that AT device, whether it's just a pencil grip, throughout the day. So myth number 4 is going to be that an AT evaluation is required prior to provision of an AT. And I think this is often a big myth. So the fact is that an AT evaluation can be included as an AT service for a child, but it is not required under IDEA. So the specific AT devices and services needed by a child with disability are determined appropriate by the case conference committee based on what that child needs. So there are many AT devices and services that can be provided without an actual AT evaluation. So for example, a graphic organizer that assists the child to categorize ideas into topics, subtopics, and supporting facts would not require an evaluation to be used. An AT evaluation might be needed for a child when it comes to determining an appropriate AT device that would be using throughout the entire day. This could be read aloud software or the use of peers readers during different academic periods. IDEA would call that a functional evaluation of the child in their customary environment. An AT evaluation could be included as part of an initial eval or re-eval, or it can be a standalone evaluation. If that case conference determines that an AT evaluation is needed, you do have to have consent from the parent prior to conducting that evaluation, just like any other evaluation the case conference committee would want to facilitate. And that evaluation can provide data and information that's going to help the case conference committee determine what AT device and services are necessary and would be most appropriate for the students. So myth number 5 says children will learn to use the AT, so we don't need to train them. Well, the fact is that the district is responsible for training the students, parents, and educators on how to use the device. And this is just going to allow students to be the most successful. So if a case conference committee determines that an AT device is necessary, they also need to consider whether the child requires training or technical assistance and ensuring that that is provided. So for example, if the case conference committee determines that a 4-year-old child has no known method of communication and needs an AAC device to support their communication with teachers, related service providers, and other children in the preschool classroom. So to ensure that that child can successfully use the device, the case conference committee has to consider and potentially provide the AAC services. So that would include selecting, designing, fitting, customizing, and adapting the AAC device, as well as coordinating and using other therapies, interventions, or services with that device. It also includes training or technical assistance for a child with a disability if appropriate, as well as their family. And there are all kinds of professionals that can provide this, and we want to make sure that the educational professionals are included as well, so they can support that student throughout the school day. So our myth number 6 says that AT decisions don't need to be documented in the IEP. However, IDEA does require documentation of the AT decisions in the IEP. So we want all of the services and related services and supplementary aids all to be documented in that student's IEP. If AT devices or services are being made available to the child as part of their special education, it should be included in the IEP. And this assures that teachers and providers who are responsible for implementing the IEP are aware of that specific AT device and services that are in there. And this is especially important if a student moves from one school to another and one district from another, to ensure that that student gets that device or service in the next school. We want to make sure that's in the IEP. Myth number 7 says AT doesn't need to be considered in secondary transition, but we know that AT should be considered for inclusion in a child's transition plan, just like any other IEP. AT devices and services create more opportunities for children to be successful in their post-secondary plan, so it's just as important. A student's AT needs are not necessarily going to stop when they transition out of high school. So if a child requires an AT device and service in their IEP, it should definitely be considered and discussed when creating their transition plan. Indiana's Article 7 requires that the first IEP of the school year that the student turns 14 includes transition services, which is a little bit sooner than IDEA's requirement, which does not require that until 16, but Indiana requires that once they turn 14. Transition services are a coordinated set of services designed to assist a child with a disability in reaching their goals post-secondary. The IEP team can determine transition services that can consist of special education and related services. They can also consider what a child might need for new or existing AT devices as they're beginning that transition. Myth number 8, our last one in this section, is that AT can't be used on statewide assessments. However, the fact says that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act requires states to provide the appropriate accommodations, which include the use of AT devices for students with disabilities as part of their state assessments. So this act requires the states to give academic assessments to all public school students in reading and language arts, as well as mathematics, annually in grades 3 through 8, and then once in high school. And then science is assessed at least once in grades 3 through 5, 6 through 9, and then again in grades 10 through 12. So what does that mean? IEPs must include a statement of any individualized appropriate accommodations that are necessary to measure the academic achievement and functional performance of the child. on state or district-wide assessments. And if that accommodation is appropriately listed in that IEP, then it must be provided to the student during any assessment as well. So it's a daily accommodation, but it is also an assessment accommodation. All right, I am going to turn it over to Maggie.
And at this juncture, I wanted to remind everyone, part of what we were doing with the emojis were the fact that we were throwing up that emoji of pondering if we had heard these myths, and I think we'd probably heard almost every single one. And again, this is a great opportunity to drop some questions in the chat. Maggie also dropped a document about assessment tools, and so I'd like to make sure that everyone sees that and clicks on that, saves that. Again, because the recording started a little late, we're here with Maggie Hampton, who's the Technical Assistance Specialist at IDOE, and Carrie Bridges, who's the Program Manager at the Atlas project. And we're here today to talk about AT facts and myths, and this has been fantastic so far. So I wanted to let everybody know and bring them up to speed and look at what is in the chat. And please put your questions in there also.
Thanks, Lisa. So the link that I put in the chat just kind of goes along with what Carrie was talking about with statewide assessments. So it just provides information about how AT devices and other accommodations can be utilized when participating in assessments. So if you're talking about that in your case conference committee meetings and you need kind of a reference document, that's available for you so that you can kind of see what it looks like when those accommodations transfer over and they're using them on their statewide assessments. So now we're going to talk about AT devices and services. So our first myth in this section, myth number 9, AT is always high tech. This is something that Carrie and I have been really talking about with people, because a lot of times when people talk about AT, they're thinking about maybe a communication device. They're thinking about some other items that like an iPad, something that has technology in it. And that is just not always the truth. Sometimes there are mid-tech items. Sometimes they're low-tech items. You know, Carrie was talking about a pencil grip as an example of an AT device. So we don't really want to limit ourselves to thinking about AT as, you know, something with a plug that maybe has, you know, an iPad or something that's really high tech. There are all kinds of devices. So I'm going to put another link in the chat here, and this is from, this is from the IRIS Center, and this is high-tech, mid-tech, and low-tech examples of AT devices, just so you can see some of the different options that are out there as far as some of those mid and low-tech devices. Myth number 10, AT should only be considered for certain children. So this kind of goes back to myth number 1, that AT is considered at all IEP meetings. It's not just for certain children. It's not for certain eligibility categories. We consider it at all IEP meetings because it's considered for all children with IEPs. So there's, you know, AT has really been proven to be effective for a variety of children with disabilities. And sometimes we think about AT, we think about certain disabilities that have shown that, you know, there are devices out there that are useful, but we can really make sure that we're considering the child's individual needs rather than an eligibility category or some other kind of checklist to think about whether a student would should be considered for AT. So when we can think about a student that has no known method of communication, they might require a communication device to communicate with others. Maybe a student with dyslexia could benefit from an audiobook that's paired with a written text for reading. Maybe a child with an intellectual disability or a child with some fine motor impairments could use some speech-to-text software for writing an essay. So there really isn't a certain direction that AT needs to take or a certain eligibility category that needs to be served for AT. Your case conference committees, that they should really be considering the individual needs of the child in order to make those AT decisions. All right, myth number 11, AT devices and services are only for use at school. And really the fact is that a learner's AT device should be used across all of their environments because it should improve the child's use of the AT throughout their whole day. So when we look at IDEA's definition of an AT device, like we said before in the last one, it's high tech, mid tech, low tech, lots of different kinds of options, but all AT means is that it's any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether it's acquired commercially off the shelf, whether it's modified or customized, it's used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of a child with a disability. And that term functional capabilities, if it's to maintain or improve the functional capabilities of a child, that's not exclusive to academic classroom time. That does, carry over into the home environment, into extracurriculars, into transportation, so all kinds of different places. So those AT devices and services, they could be used during those non-academic and those extracurricular activities. They could be taking those to counseling services, athletics, any kind of recreational activities, clubs, things like that. So we really want to make sure that, the student is using that AT in all of their areas that it would be useful. The use of AT devices and services, it really is, hopefully to increase a child's independence while they're engaging with others in all of those kinds of environments, not just in school. If they require a communication device, they're going to need to communicate outside of the classroom, so they should be taking that device to where they need to use it. So we don't have to limit AT devices only to use in the school building. All right, next myth number 12, AT tool selection does not need to be individualized. The fact is that AT devices and services, they need to be responsive to a child's individualized needs. If we're considering it for every student, then it should be an individualized decision with an individualized tool. And there are just a really wide range of AT options that we keep saying, low tech, mid tech, high tech, lots of options. And Carrie's team over at the Atlas Project is really great because maybe you're sitting in a case conference committee meeting and you're thinking, okay, I know a device is needed, but I don't know what to choose. Maybe a lot of schools, sometimes maybe they're used to using a certain device that they've had a lot of success with, but we need to venture out into some other options for a student. So if you need support to find those items, definitely reach out to us and we can connect you with that Atlas team to try out some different options. But if the case conference committee determines that AT devices and services are necessary, then you should have somebody that's on that team that's knowledgeable about some AT options and solutions. So we can support you there too. And then when you decide those things, that you might need to get some training to use them. If if your school is one of those that is used to maybe using a certain device and they're venturing out into something new for your student, and you can say, okay, well, we're going to try something new and we're going to be trained on it to make sure that we know how to use it. All right, myth number 13, and this is a fun one to learn because just as technology progresses and there's more things out there, this is a really common misconception, is that accessible technology and assistive technology are the same thing. So I can give you an example here of a conversation that I had where I was talking about this with my niece. She was in a really terrible car accident a couple months ago, and she's doing well. She's doing fine, recovering really well. But she was learning about some of the accessible technology on her iPhone while she was recovering. So here, I'm just going to let you know, accessible technology is a term used to describe technology that's designed in a way to really support all kinds of different users to make that technology a little bit easier for them. But assistive technology is a term that describes a piece of technology that were selecting to perform a specific task for an individual child with a disability. So my niece, when she was recovering, she really wanted to stay bundled up in her blanket. She had, she was just uncomfortable and sore in her, after her car accident. And so she got one of those clickers to like flip through her Instagram feed on a ring. Has anybody seen those? Right? Okay. So, it's an accessible technology. It supports all kinds of different people. It could be a piece of assistive technology, I guess. But really, it was just kind of made to make that tech easier to use. So we were kind of talking about how that, that's a piece of accessible technology out there. So accessible technology is really just a large category. It can meet the needs of all kinds of users. Our phones and different pieces of tech have all kinds of built-in features to really individualize your experience. So if you use those, then that's all accessible technology. AT, that assistive technology, again, it's intentionally selected to help a person with a disability perform a specific task. And it's included in the IEP because it does that. So we wanted to talk about this because schools, sometimes they have accessible technology and might think that a student doesn't need assistive technology because maybe a Chromebook has speech to text, so we don't need any AT devices because the Chromebook does it. But sometimes we really might need a different avenue to provide that speech to text if what's already on the device is not working. So again, if you have questions about those kinds of things and think that maybe we need a more individualized approach, this could be that myth that you're falling in. Myth number 15, using AT will not improve a child's outcomes. And the fact is that research really does demonstrate that the use of AT devices and services does improve child outcomes in all settings. We see research showing us the use of AT devices and services can lessen the impacts of a child's disability. For example, AT might address some reading challenges by providing some extra options for accessing that information to customize the display of information. It might reduce some writing challenges by providing some options for expressing thoughts and knowledge. It might support spelling. For children with autism, there's really a growing use of socially assistive robots to assist in communication skills. I don't know if anybody here's students have used the RoboKind robots or any of those other kinds of technology out there. If you have a student that's blind or low vision, there's wearable devices that incorporate computer vision to detect obstacles and allow a child to fully participate in their daily activities. So all kinds of different options out there to really meet students in different kinds of ways. Myth number 16, using AT lowers a child's motivation. So kind of going along with that last one, we see that AT really increases a child's motivation to complete assignments. And, when Carrie and her team go out and work with schools and work with students to choose those devices, you can see really quickly when a child is trying a new device, when the motivation is there, and things happen pretty quickly. And that doesn't mean that we go, from 0 to 100 overnight, but really, we can see children's motivation when they find something that works well for them. So in addition to it being a requirement to making those AT devices and services available to meet FAPE, that free and appropriate public education, research shows that AT devices and services really keep them engaged in their schoolwork. Specifically, children with disabilities reported that being able to listen to text through their AT devices while they're reading assists in comprehension and completion of assignments. I know my students really, really loved it when they found a book that they enjoyed, that they could have a paper book and an audio book at the same time. We can do that a lot of times for textbooks and things, but then going out to the library, finding a book that they enjoy and an audio book so they can follow along really did increase comprehension. This is a good place. Student motivation, when they find the tools that work for them, can really skyrocket. Myth number 17, if the child doesn't want to use the AT, we shouldn't push it. So this is good. It's always good to take in the students' feedback and make sure that we're using that to make decisions, because ultimately it's the student who we're trying to benefit. So if a student doesn't want to use an AT device, it's really critical that that case conference committee works with the child to understand and address the root cause of that not wanting to use the device, because there's all kinds of reasons that they might not want to use it. Maybe they feel a little bit stigmatized, in the introduction of a new device. Maybe they don't understand how to use it correctly. Maybe they were going through the training session with somebody and they're like, yeah, I got it, but they really didn't. So now it's causing frustration later down the line. So we can really make sure we're training the child on how to use the device, making sure that the team around them, so parents, school staff, all of the people that are working with the student, they are also, knowledgeable about using the device, can interact with the device themselves. So as parents, if you need to ask for that training as your student is getting it, you can do that. That's okay. Make sure that we're connecting those devices to real life, non-school functions, using those AT devices, kind of like we talked about, in all of the different environments where it's useful, so that it doesn't become just a school device. It becomes a little bit less useful that way too. So really just making sure your case conference committee is meeting to develop that plan and make sure you're understanding the root cause so you can address that root cause. Maybe this is one of those situations where you do need to go back and do an AT evaluation and see what you can find that maybe the student would not refuse. So, taking that feedback into account and finding another option is something that we can address in the case conference committee. All right, myth number 18. The school is less responsible if the child uses their own assistive technology. So this is one that I've definitely heard before, or heard thoughts about before. And sometimes as parents, you might think about having your own device on top of a school supported or a school owned device, and that would be totally fine. But AT devices and services that are written into the IEP, those are the responsibility of the school. So there are all kinds of ways to be flexible if you guys agree together as a parent and a school. So the whole case conference committee agreeing on using a student, personal device, a family device, instead of using the school device.
Maggie, if I could right there, because we're halfway through, and there was a question that I know this deals with exactly that Andrea gave out. So many times as we're sitting in the conference, there is a discussion about, there is a device and it's really helping the child with communication. Parent wants to bring it home, wants to be able to use it. Sometimes there's a discussion about a waiver being signed. Is there any thing that you can speak to? I know that sometimes families look at getting the same device through their insurance. There's a variety of things, but sometimes that child actually needs that device in order to do their homework. So is there something you could speak to in that question? We're right at that moment, so it seemed to fit in.
And Andrea, I'm so sorry I missed that, because really, so going back to, I'm going to go back to myth number 11. So help me remember that I'm in myth 18 right now. So this kind of goes back to that idea that AT devices and services are only for the school, which is just not true. If the student does need that device to do their homework, to communicate out in the community, to participate in activities, in their athletics and transportation, if it is required to meet that free appropriate public education, then yes, it can leave the school. It doesn't have to stay at the school. Now, there does need to be some understanding between, the case conference committee about what that looks like. So yes, you could, if you wanted to, buy a second. When I see duplicated, I'm thinking maybe the school has a device and the family has a device, which you could do. What I think might work better, depending on the device. There might be certain situations where it'd be better for that one device to be used in all environments. for communication devices and some other things, it'd probably be best to just have one device that you're using in all of those different environments.
Maggie, what
So,
we've often ran into is schools have not wanted to allow the device to go home. That's where I would say historically, I can't speak for everyone, it has been, no, this cannot go home. Sometimes the discussion has been a waiver as to financial responsibility. So that had always been our discussion point at the table. If this child needs it for communication and needs it to access their FAPE. So that's what I believe. Andrea, not that I'm speaking for her, but Andrea is probably saying, as most of our staff, the difficulty's been being the school allowing it to go home.
yes. According to Article 7 in IDEA, especially if you're thinking about, those kinds of situations where we're talking about increasing, maintaining, or improving functional capabilities of a student with a disability, then we probably should be thinking about that. So if that is something that maybe your school needs some support with creating maybe some policies and procedures around, that is definitely something that we can support you guys with. So let us know how we can help you guys bust up these myths and get that tech where it needs to be.
Thank you. Please keep adding questions, and toward the end, we'll finish those because I have a question or two also.
Yes. Oh, okay. So let me go ahead. I'm going to move on to deploying AT devices and services. I'm going to be mindful of the time, Carrie.
No, you are fine. We appreciate this greatly. You're totally fine. Just complete. Don't rush. Carrie, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Myth number 19 says that a child can wait for their AT device while their district works with the company to acquire it. And the fact is that AT is to be made available to the child as soon as possible. So this is a great segue into the Atlas project. So if your IEP case conference committee just determines that an assistive technology device is required and is put into the IEP, it is the responsibility of the school to get that made available as soon as possible. Some devices, if they're ordering things, are going to come very quickly and are easily accessible. Some may take a little longer. So the lending library that Atlas has, we have over 2,000 items, could be a help in that area. So if you've ordered that item, but it's going to be 3 or 4 weeks before that arrives, you want that student to start using that, we can allow the school, or that's what we do, to borrow the item and get started on it. Also, kind of in that same realm, if that student's device stops working or is broken, needs to be repaired, our lending library also allows for that device to be sent out to be repaired, but the school can request the same item for us. If we have it, they can use that while that interim is happening of getting the device fixed or updated, whatever that might be. AT devices are going to vary greatly, like I said, in their excuse me, their availability, their cost, if they need to be customized for a student. We have AT devices that can be downloaded and printed off the computer, given to the child that day. Some can be purchased at local stores and might need like minimal customization, such as a larger keyboard. And then there's going to be AT devices that are unique to each child, and they do have to be sized for the child's needs. What specific software do they need? So regardless of all of that, the idea requires that as soon as possible after that IEP is developed, that the child is having that AT device accessible to them. So that's kind of something just to think about in that IEP meeting as you are determining or making that determination. So myth 20 states that the child, oops, there we go. I'm sorry, I'm reading. IT must approve all AT. And we hear this a lot when schools are borrowing items from us to try out. And it's actually the IEP and the case conference committee that determines what AT devices and services are necessary for the student. The case conference team should be familiar with the child's AT needs and engage with the IT department and their local education agency leaders, but the IT department cannot make that determination. So it may be, depending on the type of device you need, especially if it's a little bit more high tech, you may need to work with the IT department to integrate that into a student's. Sometimes they have lots of firewalls and things like that, but it is required that the student can access that device or service, even if it has to work with the IT department. We here, my IT department won't allow that often. So myth 21 says that only AT professionals can provide AT devices and services. Well, the fact is that IDEA requires the case conference committee to have representation of the LEA who are qualified to provide or supervise the provision of specially designed instructions to meet the needs of the student. So each individual or IEP conference is going to be different. Who is needed or what the process is to select, purchase, and provide the AT devices and service is going to vary depending on the student and the case conference committee. Sometimes AT device and services is delivered by the child's regular classroom teacher. Sometimes it's a special education teacher. Sometimes it's a related service provider. We see that a lot with devices that are related to speech or OT or PT. If there are complex AT needs, either the parent or the LEA can include other individuals who have knowledge or a special expertise in that area to be a part of that case conference when it's discussed. The school can also access technical assistance from the DOE TA team or the state AT Act program, which we have a little bit more info about for you. So myth 22 says that, line 22, oh, yep, there's Maggie, just want to make sure. That the myth is that we don't have AT resources available in our state. However, the fact is that each state must have an AT program that can provide devices and training. So that is where myself and my team come in with Atlas. We are able to provide services, training, demonstrations to anyone, any public school in the state of Indiana. So the requirement is that every state has to have that program. And sometimes it's hard to justify purchasing an AT device if the case conference committee is not sure what device will be the best for them or whether the device will be effective. And so that really is where we come in. So the 21st Century Assistive Technology Act, the AT Act, is administered through the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Community Living, and states receive funding to provide this technical assistance. So the knowledge sharing, the resources, the borrowing, and to a wide range of individuals. So they can receive support in discussing and learning about various devices that might work. So, you know, what are some different price points that we can look at? They can, like I said, they can request a demonstration of any device and maybe realize like maybe this is too high tech for where we are right now, or it's too low tech for where the student is now. That AT Act also allows for you to borrow devices for a short period of time and then learn about how to purchase the device through the school or financing and loan options that might be available. So like I said, Atlas can provide a lot of those services or assistance. There is a QR code on this slide, and that'll take you right to our program. I think I saw Maggie also put the website in the chat. So we have lots of information available on there. There are, our entire library is available to browse. If you go to technical assistance, there is a technical assistance form you can fill out. If you just have questions or you're like, I know I need help, but I don't know exactly what, you can fill that out. And then myself or a member of my team will reach out to you to help provide support for you. Okay, and I think we're gonna move into our last part and let Maggie take it over.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to talk about part C. So if you are a parent with an infant or a toddler, any student birth through age of 2. Oh, my heart just goes out. I love the little babies. They're just so cute. But we're going to talk a little bit about the Part C programming. And a lot of people don't necessarily think about AT before kindergarten. And so we can definitely support that. So that's myth number 23. Children birth to 3 don't benefit from AT. And the fact is the AT devices and services, they can and they do support infants, toddlers, and their families in meeting developmental needs. And they meet the needs of the families as you guys are working together in your infant and toddler's development. So very similar to the way the AT devices and services increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of those school-age children. That's the same for infants and toddlers with disabilities. And there are all kinds of AT devices and services that we can deploy to support those youngsters and families. So let's get some examples here. So a functional AT evaluation could assess if an infant or toddler would benefit from AT devices and services. Some AAC devices, maybe some pictures of activities or objects. Maybe it's a handheld object or a handheld tablet, I'm sorry, but something that can help infants and toddlers express wants and needs. Maybe some tactile books that can really be felt and experienced for infants and toddlers with some sensory difficulties. But just like AT devices and services for school-age children, these AT devices can vary from low-tech to high-tech for infants and toddlers. Think about things like helmets, cushions, adaptive seating, standing aids. Those can all be supportive to students. And then again, thinking about infants and toddlers, this is probably new to you. So maybe you need some training and support too, to really make sure that those AT devices are really being used throughout an infant or a toddler's day. You can request that training and support. Myth 24, Part C doesn't require AT. And the fact is that both the IDEA and other regulations include AT devices and services as an early intervention service. So we don't have to wait until kindergarten to deploy AT. Part C of the IDEA includes both AT devices and AT services within its definition. So if you have the individualized family service plan, then you can determine that an AT device or service would be required to meet those developmental needs of your student with a disability and you as a family to appropriately support your infant or toddler's development. So then it needs to be provided. As an early intervention service, your team needs to make sure that they document that AT device and service, just like we talked about on the Part B side. And then we also want to make sure that we're reviewing and evaluating those AT devices and services every year, just like with that Part B program, to make sure that those services and devices are appropriate, that they don't need to be changed or modified as the student gets older. Myth 25, AT isn't considered at the preschool transition. So we talked about transition from school to post-secondary life. So now we're thinking about transition from those preschool programs into the school age program. So when you're getting ready to make that transition, AT needs to be considered there when your toddler is transitioning out of preschool, regardless of whether they currently use AT services or not. So even if you have a infant or toddler getting ready to transition that does not use AT, that doesn't mean that you don't need to think about it. It still should be considered. So that can be brought up at any time. For toddlers that might be eligible for special education in the school when they're transitioning, those early intervention service providers need to convene a transition conference at least 90 days before your toddler's 3rd birthday to discuss special education related services and then any supplementary aids and services that the toddler is going to receive through that IEP after the transition. So if they're currently getting those services, then think about how they'll be used and what needs to maybe be updated in the IEP when they go from that IFSP to the IEP. Okay. Myth 26, we're getting there. We're getting close to the end now. I know it's a lot of myths and facts, but there really are just a lot of misconceptions around assistive technology. So myth 26 says early intervention is not supported by state AT programs. And I love Easter Seals uses the term twinkles to wrinkles. There is services and support out there for the entire lifespan. So state AT programs, they serve individuals of any age. That includes infants, toddlers with any type of disability. So getting off on a little bit of a tangent, but not too far because of time. If you have an elderly family member that maybe needs some AT services, that Easter Seals has the In Data program. So really the whole range of life, there is AT out there for you. And it can be really difficult to justify purchasing an AT device, coming back to our youngsters, when that early childhood team is unsure what to purchase or what's going to be effective. And that AT Act, like Carrie was talking about, those loans, the support to come and try some different things, to do some different demos, to collect some data and see what works before you go through the process of purchasing. That is just such a beneficial service that can save some of those resources for later. So through all of those kinds of resources, the early intervention service provider can assess the AT device, collect the data, and see what would be most effective before purchasing the device. But it should be, we do support that in the early childhood environment. Okay, so moving on from Part C to AT costs and funding, there is just one myth in this section, but it is a big one because this is kind of where sometimes people stop in their thought process about AT. They think AT is expensive, so we don't have any money, so we're just going to stop thinking about it there, right? Okay, so while some AT is expensive, I'm sounding like a broken wheel, I hope at this point, but there are many forms of AT devices and services. There's high tech, mid tech, low tech, some of it with little to no cost. So again, AT is any item, it's a piece of equipment, product, or system, whether you're acquiring it commercially off the shelf, whether you're modifying it, customizing it, but you're using it to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a child with a disability. So I know I shared the Atlas catalog, but you don't have to be restricted to any kind of list. If it meets that definition, it's a piece of AT and we can consider it. The fact of the matter is some of it is expensive. Sometimes you might need to get an electronic braille display that allows a child who's deaf or blind to read on a device, and that's going to cost some money, but it is going to be necessary to provide that student with FAPE. Sometimes it's just keyboard stickers for maybe a student with low vision to kind of get their orientation on the keyboard. So those kinds of costs, they're really vary widely, and it's not, there's all kinds of different options, but ultimately a child's AT devices and services should be determined by the child's needs rather than the cost or the convenience. And I know that is something that you as parents probably, it's probably a little bit of a relief to hear, these things should be provided by the school regardless of the cost based on the need. So those are all of our myths and facts. So I want you guys to go ahead, and if you would like to type some questions in the chat, you can start doing that. I'm just going to show some resources, and then I'll give you guys a minute to come off mute if you want to ask some questions that way. So this, like I said, the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems, they provided some good resources. The myths and facts that we came over, Those all came from the Office of Special Ed Programs at the federal level, but these are all kind of some supporting documents to kind of break things down. So that IDEA guidance is right here. Like I said, very easy to understand. I'm holding it right here because yeah, it's only 19 pages. So if that is something that you want to look back through and look at the whole thing, you can look at that. The National Ed Tech program has all of these myths and facts as part of the National Educational Technology Plan, which is great because that plan is for schools in general, not just for special education. So they really did consider students with disabilities and their assistive technology needs when putting out that plan. So that's great. Those graphics that are on these slides here and the alt text for graphics are here. If you want to play a matching game, you know, if you're maybe talking about if you've got older transition age students that you want to make sure that they're learning these AT myths and facts. If you want to be talking to people about AT myths and facts, that's kind of nice. Here is a good checklist, and I'm going to click on this one really quickly here. This is from our Parent Center Hub, our federal version of InSource, right? Okay.
Right.
And this really gives some good resources about AT. And then here's an FAQ, last one. Okay. So this is the Easter Seals website right here, and I dropped that in the chat earlier so that you guys can have that. Check out that catalog. You know, work with your schools to be requesting items as they're needed, and then you know, keep checking in there. They're going to be having some other you know, any kind of time you need information and assistance about AT, definitely be reaching out to them.
Maggie and Carrie, thank you so much. So I've got a few things. So everyone, I'm excited to say that February 20th, we're going to have the same presentation again on our InSource webinar. So that's February the 20th at 1:30. And we will get to have an opportunity to ask questions again, look at this again, and that is so helpful. We appreciate it greatly. And my question is, because we have a lot of our staff on today, but we will have parents, we'll have community stakeholders, school, a variety of different people watching this at different times. If a school wants to request technical assistance from the Atlas project, do they do the complete the JOT form, or do they contact Atlas directly?
Yes, if they're looking for technical assistance, they're going to fill out that JOT form.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
And the JOT form is a technical assistance request form where schools will request technical assistance. It will go back to the department and it will be considered, and then the steps will be taken to provide that. So I just wanted to make sure for anyone listening, parents, staff, oh, and there's a JOT form, so that if you're setting at a conference and someone asks or says, well, we don't have someone who can help us learn this, then the school personnel could fill out that JOT form. And that's what that's for. It's the mechanism for the department to then turn around and provide that assistance. Again, thank you so much for attending today. You've been at office hours with the Indiana Department of Education and InSource. InSource is the Parent Training and Information Center for Indiana. We have been assisting families for 50 years this year, and we're so thrilled with the collaboration that we have with our Department of Education. This will be up on our YouTube channel later on today or tomorrow. Please feel free to share this, because this is a great opportunity. I had heard practically every myth, and it's wonderful to be able to give the resources. Maggie put this PowerPoint in the chat. We'll have access to that. We'll put some of those resources out in our resource on our resource sites so that we can be of assistance also. So is there any other questions at this point for Maggie or Carrie? Well, if not, then this will include office hours with IDOE and InSource. Again, remember, we'll have this presentation again February the 20th at 1:30 on the InSource webinars, and that will give us another opportunity to hear all of this. And this will conclude our office hours for the month of January. Please join us again in February to talk about, I believe it's special education evaluations. Is that right, Maggie? All right. So thank you all very much. Please make sure you also visit our website at insource.org or the Department of Education's website. Thank you very much, and have an excellent day.